Gotta watch out. I'll think it's an encore.
Shabbat Shalom. Good Yom Tov, everybody. When we left one another at the end of day one of Rosh Hashanah, we were deep in shame. I made the case that over time, Judaism shifted from an honor-shame culture, like the rest of the Middle East, to a culture of dignity, as a result of a series of calamities that left Jews on what Isabel Wilkerson, in her book Caste, calls the bottom rung. I cited Wilkerson to drive home the point that when Christianity became the official religion of the Holy Roman Empire, Christianity leaped from being the bottom rung to the top of the ladder, and Judaism sunk to the bottom rung, undermining some of our core assumptions. Tonight we're going to Israel, and we're traveling by way of Islam. Their founding prophet Muhammad died in 630. He spread his new, relatively righteous religion throughout the Arabian Peninsula. By 750, the Islamic Empire stretched from Western Africa and Spain all the way to India. They also led developments in many fields of learning for hundreds of years: mathematics, philosophy, mysticism, law, and poetry. But in the 19th century, three major movements came together, none of which was good for the Arabs. Number one, this was the age of European nationalism. Italy becomes a country in 1861, Germany in 1871. Number two was the European scramble for African colonies. Great Britain took control of Egypt in 1882, and France took Algeria and Tunisia. The third movement, not unrelated to the first two, was the emergence of political Zionism. A little pamphlet called Rome and Jerusalem by Moses Hess was published in 1862, and Leon Pinsker's Auto-Emancipation in 1882 both predated the contributions of Theodore Herzl. So we've got nationalism, colonialism, and Zionism, the unholy trinity for the Arab world. Now let's go to 1898. It's 1 year after the first Zionist Congress in Switzerland. Some Arabs had been paying attention, and in their press, there were discussions of how to respond to the budding Zionist movement. Here is a searing fragment written by an Arab nationalist in Arabic to other Arabs. Remember, this is written by an Arab nationalist. You complacent non-entities, look at what peoples and nations do. Are you content for it to be reported in the newspapers of every country that the penniless of the weakest peoples, the Jews, whom all governments are expelling, have so much knowledge and understanding of civilization and its ways that they can take possession of your country, establish colonies in it, and reduce its masters to hired hands and its rich to poor men? This Arab nationalist is pointing out that we Jews were still on the bottom rung. We were the penniless of the weakest peoples, whom all governments were expelling. Meanwhile, all over the Middle East and North Africa, Christian Europeans were colonizing the Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam. At the turn of the 20th century, you've got Arab intellectuals calling out their leadership for allowing weak, penniless, and powerless Zionist colonists to take over Palestine. A few decades later, we were so weak and powerless that 2/3 of our European population was exterminated. That is shameful. And yet, in the wake of the greatest catastrophe to ever happen to our people, 3 years later, we managed to overcome the Arab and Muslim world in the Israeli War of Independence. Now, who's on the bottom rung? The Holy Roman Empire turning Christian was for us Jews what the establishment of a sovereign Jewish state in Palestine was for Arab Muslims. Deep, deep shame. The difference was that there were still tens of millions of Arab Muslims, while the Israeli Jewish population was 600,000. Richard Landes, a professor of medieval history and a contemporary political commentator, lays bare the psychological roots of today's conflict. This honor-shame dynamic explains much of the Arab and Muslim hostility to Israel, as well as to the West. Israel, a state of free Jews living inside the Dar al-Islam, the realm of Islam, constitutes a living blasphemy. And Israel's ability to survive repeated Arab efforts to destroy it constitutes a permanent state of shame before the entire global community. Professor Landes is also reminding us that Hamas is not fighting about real estate. It's fighting against a living blasphemy that humiliates Islam by daring to claim sovereignty, non-Islamic sovereignty, in the heart of the Islamic world. It's not about a two-state solution. It's about Muslim shame and the challenge to Muslims' core assumptions. I said this last week and I'm repeating it. You have to understand that in order to understand the Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab conflict. Understanding that does not force you to agree with Landes' solution to the problem. But any effective solution must address the right problem. It's a terribly tough and scary time to be an American Jew. I want to give you more tools to confront questions and charges that, intentionally or not, fuel narratives that endanger American Jews and vilify Israelis. The history of the Middle East has lots of details, but Hamas's ideology is pretty simple. That's easy to share with people. American history is also very helpful. It's more familiar to you, and in some ways it's the most effective response to Americans who challenge Israel's conduct in the war. It's reasonable to claim that the last war the United States won was World War II. Forcing your enemies to surrender is how you win a war. Germany and Japan surrendered, and our relations with both today are good. So that's a potential model to imitate. During World War II, in order to convince Japan to surrender, the United States carpet-bombed and atom-bombed their island twice, incinerating 650,000 Japanese civilians. Even without dropping atom bombs on Germany, tallies of German civilians slaughtered during World War II are between 1.5 million and 3 million. When an American demands a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in Gaza or Hezbollah at Israel's northern border, or abandons our remaining hostages, that's hypocrisy. America fought until its enemies surrendered. Let me be clear, I'm not talking about what Israel decides to do. That's their choice. But when an American makes demands on a foreign country that is at odds with what America itself did, that's hypocritical. and we can call that out. And let's not forget, the U.S. rounded up 120,000 Japanese American citizens, forced them to sell their homes and their businesses, and put them in concentration camps to which they could bring nothing more than what they could fit in their suitcases. That's what the U.S. did after Pearl Harbor, which was a military attack on a military installation. Most of you know this history. It is not irrelevant when speaking about Israel's response to Hamas and Hezbollah. Given what the U.S. did in World War II to secure victory, why shouldn't the Israelis, whose homeland has been repeatedly and viciously violated, be allowed to do the same? Germany surrendered unconditionally. Japan surrendered unconditionally, but with a condition. The Allies were not to ask for the removal of Emperor Hirohito from the throne. That was their condition for unconditional surrender. Japan is an honor-shame culture, and they absolutely had to save face. So the United States shrewdly granted them the face-saving gesture of allowing Emperor Hirohito to remain enthroned as long as he agreed to take orders from the Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers, General Douglas MacArthur. Even in war, the ultimate object is peace. That means those waging war need to figure out two things. The first is how to win, but the second is how to pursue peace. And the U.S. successfully did both after World War II. On Rosh Hashanah, I cited Professor Rebecca Merkin about the characteristics of honor-shame cultures. She concludes her discussion with the following warning. Some form of active rectification needs to take place for Middle Easterners to believe that they have relinquished their shame. Sometimes that active reckoning takes the form of violence and/or retribution. Consequently, given the greater significance and prevalence of shame in Middle Eastern cultures compared with Western cultures, its avoidance in communication is essential. Its avoidance in communication is central. So shaming people, that's halvanat panim, right? Embarrassing someone in public. That's what we talked about on Rosh Hashanah. Better to throw yourself in a fiery furnace. That's excellent advice for Israel. But we need to step into the breach here and be Israel's ambassadors. The Palestinians have their ambassadors here who explicitly advocate killing Zionists wherever they are. Our Israeli family and friends are not asking us to enlist in the Israeli Defense Forces, but we can still enlist in the forces for Israel's defense. Let's say someone screams, "Stop slaughtering women and children in Gaza and Lebanon. Stop the genocide." One can imagine a response along the lines of, "We would be happy to, as soon as Hamas can no longer slaughter and rape and desecrate every human being, including infants, who makes the fatal mistake of being on sovereign, uncontested Israeli soil. And by the way, spring for a dictionary so you can look up genocide." We American Jews and Israelis really would love to stop the slaughter of innocents. The sentiment was sincere. The problem is that sarcasm neutralizes sympathy. No one who hears that kind of response will hear the sympathy. They'll only hear the sarcasm. In response to the slaughter of innocents, we should not be sarcastic, we should not be triumphalist, nor should we be righteously indignant. Such responses come across as callous. We should express sorrow, demonstrably. We can even say, "I am so sorry," which is not an apology. They're two different words because they're two different things. We're sorry for the way things have worked out. That is true. We apologize only if we bear not responsibility for how things worked out, but culpability. And we don't. Moral clarity requires us to see what Hamas did on 10/7 was not about Israeli actions for which there is what to apologize. But the pogrom on October 7th was about the living blasphemy that is the sovereign Jewish state in the heart of historical Islamic lands. And for that, we offer no apology. After 10/7 in Gaza and after 10/8 in Lebanon, almost every government in the world agreed Israel has the right to defend itself. What we've seen in the past year is what defense looks like against these enemies. This is not genocide. This is not vengeance. This is defense against an Islamic ideology that demands the destruction of the state of Israel. That's their charter. That's what they've tried to do repeatedly, and that's what they've vowed to do again and again until their mission is successful. Israel needs to do more than prevent their success. It needs to prevent their attempts at success, because those attempts look like 10/7. Never again? Never again. Israel needs America, and the American Jewish community in particular, to understand their reality. It's lovely to be a member of the American Jewish community when Israel smells like roses because of their successes at Entebbe, which makes Jews around the world safer, or because of their technological breakthroughs of the startup nation, or because of Hadassah's medical advances, or because of their dominance in Olympic windsurfing, or their victories in Eurovision, or because Israel opened up their border to Syria, their enemy, to care for the victims of the Syrian civil war in Israeli hospitals. But Israel doesn't smell so good right now. What's the opposite of smelling like a rose? Israel doesn't need fair-weathered Zionists who stand by Israel only when she's smelling like a rose and can retain her moral purity. It's much easier to retain your moral purity when you have no political power. And it's much likelier you'll be killed without political power. Never again. And no apologies, but sincere sadness. Israel does not enjoy moral purity. Babies are dying because Israel can no longer refrain from taking out our enemies who hide behind non-combatants, who cynically exploit women and children as human shields. That's precisely what prevents this from being a genocide. And that's what we tell the people who demand Israel stops killing women and children. Hamas believed that the Israeli conscience wouldn't tolerate the bloodshed of babies. After 10/7, Israelis became more tolerant. Israelis finally responded despite Hamas's war crimes of embedding themselves and their military within civilian populations and infrastructure. The Israeli response gave Hamas a PR victory as videos of the carnage were uploaded and highlighted as the latest blood libel. But better a PR defeat than a pogrom. Never again. What's happened in Gaza is not a genocide, but it is a tragedy. It's a catastrophe on a scale essentially unprecedented within the lives of the Gazans. For them to talk about a second Nakba makes sense. Let's take the number from the Hamas Ministry of Health of 41,000 dead. Using that figure and their population, they've lost 80% more of their people in this war than Israel lost proportionately in the Israeli War of Independence. It's morbid to compare suffering. And there are far more Palestinians, both in absolute numbers and proportionately, who are truly suffering. It's obtuse and counterproductive to deny it. But responding with righteous indignation or sarcasm is short-sighted. One, it's unlikely to change a single mind. And two, it makes you seem indifferent at best to the anguish of the Gazans. Both of those reasons are rhetorical. They're about winning the argument. But there's a third reason, and it's about substance, not strategy. Righteous indignation and sarcasm don't just crowd out compassion from your response, they crowd out compassion from your heart. Were righteous indignation a conscious strategy, you could argue that there might still be room for compassion. But righteous indignation is not a strategy, it's a reflex, and it's not healthy. The more we say something, the more we believe that and nothing but that. Righteous indignation and sarcasm harden our hearts. That's for Pharaoh, not for us. Pharaoh is the guy who orders babies to be killed. I'm going to read you a eulogy by Moshe Dayan for the funeral of Ro'i Rothberg, a 21-year-old kibbutznik who lived in Nahal Oz, one of the kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope. In 1956, Ro'i was ambushed by 5 Gazans who killed him and then gouged out his eyes. Moshe Dayan was chief of staff in 56. Early yesterday morning, Ro'i was murdered. The quiet of the spring morning dazzled him, and he did not see those waiting in ambush for him at the edge of the furrow. Let us not cast the blame on the murderers today. Why should we declare their burning hatred for us? For 8 years, they've been sitting in the refugee camps in Gaza. And before their eyes, we have been transforming the land and the villages where they and their fathers dwelt into our estate. It's not among the Arabs in Gaza, but in our own midst that we must seek Ro'i's blood. How did we shut our eyes and refuse to look squarely at our fate and see in all its brutality the destiny of our generation? Have we forgotten that this group of young people dwelling at Nahal Oz is bearing the heavy gates of Gaza on its shoulders? Beyond the furrow of the border, a sea of hatred and desire for revenge is swelling, awaiting the day when serenity will dole our path. Ro'i's blood is crying out to us and only to us from his torn body. Although we have sworn 1,000-fold that our blood shall not flow in vain, yesterday again we were tempted, we listened, we believed. We will make our reckoning with ourselves today. We're a generation that settles the land, and without the steel helmet and the cannon's maw, we will not be able to plant a tree and build a home. Let us not be deterred from seeing the loathing that is inflaming and filling the lives of the hundreds of thousands of Arabs who live around us. Let us not avert our eyes lest our arms weaken. This is the fate of our generation. This is our life's choice, to be prepared and armed, strong and determined, lest the sword be stricken from our fist and our lives cut down. The young Ro'i who left Tel Aviv to build his home at the gates of Gaza to be a wall for us was blinded by the light in his heart, and he did not see the flash of the sword. The yearning for peace deafened his ear, and he did not hear the voice of murder waiting in ambush. The gates of Gaza weighed too heavily on his shoulders and overcame him. Chevre, that's what a leader sounds like. Those are the words of a man with a heart big enough for two realities, two perspectives, and two people's pain. Without losing sight of his people's needs, he recognizes the perspective of the Gazans on the other side of the fence from their refugee camp in 56, watching our kibbutzniks transform the land and villages of theirs and their fathers. Diane sees their shame. Question: why were the Gazans languishing, smoldering in refugee camps in 1956? That was before the Six-Day War of 1967, when we hear of Palestinian land conquered and colonized by the Zionists. What were they doing in refugee camps? They were in refugee camps in 1956 because they were under the control of Egypt. And Egypt refused to give them Egyptian citizenship or allow them independence. They were kept in refugee camps, the refugee camps that had been created after our War of Independence and their Nakba, their catastrophe, when 700 to 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fled or were driven out of their homes in what became Israel. Most went to the west bank of the Jordan River, controlled by Jordan, and some went to Gaza. After the war, those who fled could not return, and the refugee crisis was born. On the Rosh Hashanah, I spoke about knowing the soul of the stranger, the alien, because we were refugees from a land stricken by drought and famine. Our people dwelled in a land not our own. The Torah tells us to love the refugee because we know their soul. It is uncomfortable to admit, to acknowledge, but we know something of the Palestinian soul too. 1,000 years ago, Islam was a mighty empire that boasted the leading lights of the civilized world. The last 8 centuries have not been kind. They've suffered loss after loss against the Christian world, all while fighting against themselves. Then they were exiled by us Jews, who had been on the bottom rung for centuries. We know exile. We know shame. We know their soul. We will demand justice for ourselves, but we must also show compassion by showing respect. We are a dignity culture. Our sages cautioned us against thoughtlessly following orders, even the Torah's commandments. The Torah commands us to remember what Amalek did to us when we left Egypt, how they attacked our weakest, our oldest, our youngest, our most vulnerable, straggling behind the rest. Sound familiar? But the rabbis, our sages who founded Rabbinic Judaism, asked us also to think about what turned the tribe of Amalek into such heartless predators. Amalek's mother was Timnah. She was royalty. The rabbis tell us she wanted to convert to marry into our tribe. But Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were suspicious of her motives, and they sent her packing. Seeking to be as close as possible to the Israelites, she became Eliphaz's concubine. Eliphaz was Esav's son. Esav is Jacob's brother. The Esav who was swindled out of his blessing and birthright by his brother Jacob. Eliphaz was Amalek's father. Our rabbis blame the patriarchs for pushing away Timnah, and the Torah implicates Jacob's manipulation and deceit of his brother Esav. Amalek persecuted Israel to avenge his parents' shame. Ouch. The Midrash, like so much in our tradition, forces us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves what role we've played and continue to play in our own conflicts. I am not a sugarcoater. This moment in Israel's history is the scariest of my lifetime. This moment in American history is the scariest of my lifetime. As a Jew, as an American Jewish Zionist, I have my marching orders. I will preach and teach. I will vote. I will explain Israel's history and predicament, and I will condemn Israeli proposals and actions when needed. I hope you all will do the same. Let's go back to World War II, that potential model of a successful war. In the immediate aftermath of the war, who would have believed that we'd be such close allies with Japan and Germany? But we are. We learned our lessons from the failures of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I and instituted the Marshall Plan after World War II, and it worked. Who would have believed that the United Arab Emirates would have a Holocaust museum featuring books that not all American school districts allow? Cultures can change. I grew up watching Corporal Klinger cross-dress on MASH to get a Section 8 so he could get out of the Korean War. He could have just said he was gay, and he would have been on the next plane out of Seoul. But 50 years ago, men preferred to dodge the draft and go into exile rather than incriminating themselves in such a way. Cultures can change. We were in South Africa this summer. Nelson Mandela, Bishop Desmond Tutu, and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee largely neutralized the poison of apartheid. It's true that forgiveness is central to Christianity in a way that it's not in Islam. Bishop Tutu had a religious tradition to draw upon without the challenges of being in a Middle Eastern honor-shame culture. Israelis have to contend with that. But we're clever people who can figure out a way if there's a will, just like with Emperor Hirohito and General MacArthur. Chevre, it's scary, but there's no reason to despair. Cultures change. We need the right leaders with hearts big enough to see the dignity of the other, who recognize, who know the soul of their adversaries. As I wrote to you a few weeks ago, our tradition tells us to make funnels for our ears and chambers for our hearts to allow competing ideas to exist side by side. Look at what happened in April. Jordan and Saudi Arabia helped shoot down Iranian missiles aimed at Israel. It's a marker of what could be a cultural change. One of the members of our Boston Minion from our grad school days is now the deputy managing editor of the Jerusalem Post. Tova came back to the States for Rosh Hashanah, but was having a tough time getting a flight straight back to Israel. So she went through Dubai. Cultures change. The Talmud says that the Messiah was born on Tisha B'Av. The Messiah was born on Tisha B'Av. From unprecedented, unimaginable destruction, from a place where there is nothing but ruin on the horizon, redemption can arise. Am Yisrael Chai.